Welcome to our live stream, as we try to do every Friday, at least every Friday that we can. I'm Mike Huckabee. We're coming to you from the Huckabee Theater on the campus of TBN in Nashville, technically Hendersonville, just outside of Nashville. And we're proud to call Hendersonville our home. Pam Case joins me. She's the senior producer of The Huckabee Show, and she'll be helping us field questions that you're going to be sending. Did you know that you're going to be sending questions? I didn't know if you knew that or not, but you are. And you're going to start doing it right now. That's right. We need you to send the questions in the chat. If you'd like to get a little more visibility for your questions, send a super chat. That really bumps it up to the top. We've got moderators watching the line to get your questions, and then we'll get as many as we can. But we also will intersperse with lots of video of things that have happened this week. And I'm sure you're quite aware that there was a little incident yesterday in the news. Former President Donald Trump got indicted by some nutbag in Manhattan in the DA's office who just was so determined to go after Trump that at one time, this very prosecutor had walked away from indicting Trump, as did his predecessor, Cyrus Vance, who hated Trump and would love to have done something. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, she's been after Trump. She didn't pick up on this, nor did Merrick Garland, who doesn't like Trump, nor did the Federal Election Commission run by Democrats, nor did Bob Mueller. But Alvin Bragg decided that, by golly, he campaigned on the idea he'll get Trump, which is a little disconcerting, isn't it? That a prosecutor would announce that he's going after a target even before he had a crime to go after him for? It's really absurd. It's an outrageous insult to the Constitution and due process. But that's where we are in the country. So everybody is now aware that Donald Trump has been indicted. Please understand, it was by a grand jury, which means that of the 23 people on the grand jury in Manhattan, where Donald Trump was beaten by 80% of the votes, Alvin Bragg was able to find 12 out of 23. You don't have to have a unanimous jury like you do in a regular trial. All you have to do is a majority. So 12 out of the 23 had to vote and say, yep, Donald Trump, even though this so-called crime has run out of the statute of limitations, and even though it's really more of a federal case than a state case, so the state has no standing in it, and even though it's technically a misdemeanor, not a felony, we're going to charge him with a felony. This is insane. It really is. And what I hope happens is that a lot of Americans will wake up out of their slumber and start realizing that the government is being weaponized. Right now, it's against Donald Trump. But if you think it stops with Donald Trump, you really probably are still in diapers, because I'm telling you, the ultimate target is anybody who doesn't toe the line to the deep state and to the kind of culture insanity that we're seeing today. And that's why when even a liberal, a hardcore liberal like Matt Taibbi, who is a Rolling Stone writer, but Elon Musk let him look at Twitter files, the day he testifies to Congress, guess what happens? IRS agents show up on his doorstep, and they know he's not home because he's in Congress testifying. This is really frightening stuff when the government goons start banging on your door. Look, Avon doesn't even knock on the door anymore. I mean, we're now down to the place where it's Jehovah's Witnesses or nobody, and the IRS banging on this guy's door. This is really, really frightening. So that's one of the big things that has happened, and we're going to be talking about that. Of course, we'll be talking about Nashville school shooting and the reaction on the part of the left that is just heartbreaking, as is that horrendous crime, because it happened in our backyard. And of course, later in the program today on the live stream, we'll let Kamala Harris explain some things to us, because boy, does she ever make it clear. Yeah, real clear. Well, one of the features of our live stream is a pre-show poll. Pam has all of those details. Pam, what do we have this week?
All right, several hundred folks voting before we got started today, Gov, with this question: which scares you the most? All right, getting slapped with a wet noodle, Biden sniffing your hair, Kamala's laugh, or soggy bread. So any thoughts on which way it went?
I'm guessing it's Biden sniffing our hair.
Absolutely. 60% went with that one, followed by Kamala's laugh at 30%, and the rest was divided up between the other two. But yes, Biden sniffing your hair scares us to death.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about being slapped with a wet noodle. But Joe Biden coming up behind me sniffing my hair, that would creep me out. I got to be honest. It really would.
Anyway, thanks everybody for participating. That's good.
Our favorite comment from last week's live stream comes from Sharker, who's clearly a very smart person with impeccable taste. Here's what Sharker said, quote, "You're the voice of reason, Governor. I thank you for all you do. One of the best things you've ever done is having such a wonderful daughter, Sarah. We sure love her." Thank you, Sharker. I kind of like her myself. But then I admit, all objectivity, that I'm not exactly unbiased. So we've got a question for you. We'd love to get your comment on this. Will the indictment of Donald Trump help him or hurt him? Leave your answers in the chat or in the comments section below. We'll compile them. We may have a report back next week. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, right now is a real good time to do it. And while you're doing it, you're already pushing those buttons, push subscribe. Push that notification bell. Also, be sure to touch the like button. And when you push the share button, share. The live stream is on. Share it with all the people that you can think of and have them join us right now. Well, as we said, the Donald Trump indictment has sort of taken over the news stories of the last 24 hours, and rightfully so. Never in history has a former president been indicted for anything. This is really a new territory for the country.
Yes.
And it's not that he violently acted against someone, not that they have accused him of graft or taking money from government sources or selling off to the Chinese like we are concerned Joe Biden has been doing. No, it's that somebody who worked for him paid off with some money, supposedly to keep some people quiet about sexual relations that he claims he never had. Well, quite frankly, whether he had them or not is now less important than whether or not he was responsible for paying it, and was there any crime involved if he did pay it. Most legal scholars look at this case and say, there's no crime.
Right.
There's not a crime. But you know, one of the things that has been most disconcerting, Nancy Pelosi sent out a tweet last night in which she said, nobody is above the law, and now Donald Trump will have to prove his innocence. I thought Nancy Pelosi tore up not just the State of the Union speech by Donald Trump, but she took the Constitution and tore it in half. What an idiot, pardon me. What an idiot who was once Speaker of the House, who is so ignorant of the constitutional due process that says that when you're charged with any kind of crime in the United States, you are deemed innocent until the prosecution proves you to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and adjudicated by a jury of your peers. Donald Trump does not have to prove himself innocent. He is innocent. It is the prosecutor who has to prove he's guilty, and he has to convince not the people on MSNBC, that's an easy lift. He has to convince a juror of his peers beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I don't think he'll get a jury of his peers in New York, not in Manhattan. Right. They hate him there.
Agreed.
Well, that's going to be an interesting part.
The grand jury piece of this, too, I think, just how many was it, 12 on the grand jury that actually said, we need to indict.
Yeah.
We need to indict the man. Really, 12.
23 people were on the grand jury, only 12 have to vote.
Right.
So
doesn't make sense to me.
There's an old statement, you've probably heard it, said you can indict a ham sandwich. There are a lot of ham sandwiches being indicted in Manhattan right now. And what they mean by that is that to get an indictment is simply to be able to formally accuse somebody. An indictment is not a conviction.
Right,
It's
and they're
an
only
accusation.
listening to the prosecution side.
Yeah.
That's the other piece, too.
The person who's being accused is not allowed to be there himself, nor is he allowed to have his attorney or any witnesses. So one side gets to put on a case, kind of like they did with Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and the Nancy Pelosi horse and pony show. And they put that out there, one-sided. Nobody else got to talk or defend. And it's like, oh, well, there's a case here. Well, there's a scripture in Proverbs. It says, any case or any story sounds true until you hear the other side. We haven't heard the other side.
Right.
Neither has Alvin Bragg, and neither has that grand jury. Well, it's a very dark day in this country for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that now that we have crossed this Rubicon in weaponizing our justice system, going after political candidates that we don't like and trying to beat them in the courtroom rather than at the ballot box, the result is that's going to become the new standard, and expect to see it. And quite frankly, if the Republicans decide they're going to go and indict a bunch of Democrats, I don't want to hear a tear out of the Democrats over it.
Right.
And I don't want to hear anyone on MSNBC or CNN saying, oh, this is unfair. And I'm sure the ladies on The View will all go into some type of total meltdown over it. Just don't even bother. Just don't bother. On a more serious note and a very sobering note for all of us here, the horrific shooting this week that happened at the Presbyterian, Covenant Presbyterian Christian School, I think it just rattled everybody. First of all, that it happened at all. Then that it happened at a Christian school. It was such a cold-blooded murder. This was not like a current student or someone who came back. Apparently this individual, a female who supposedly was transitioning into being a male, had gone to this school when she was a child, but we don't know if there's any even connection to that. We do know that she also looked at a different target and decided against it because it was a harder target. They had higher security measures in place. But she shot her way in. Early reports that she went in an unlocked door is not true. Door was locked, but she shot the door and then went in and ultimately killed 3 9-year-old children and 3 school personnel. Now, what's really awful is that there are people who try to say that there were 7 victims, that the transgender female shooter was also a victim. No, she was not a victim. She was the criminal. She did the killing. And this is insane. Joe Biden did not call for a day of recognition of Christian school children. You know what he did? Today is a day that he has called for a recognition of transgenderism. Now, I don't even know how to react to that other than to say I am angry and I'm disgusted that he makes this about a transgender person rather than the people that the transgender person murdered. And by the way, there is less hate crime toward transgenders than toward Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs. I'm trying to think, there were a couple of other groups that are target sometimes of hate groups. Transgender is way down on the list. There just aren't a lot of crimes committed against them. Most people don't know many transgenders, and if they do, they don't care. It's like, just don't force me to approve it. And if you want to live that way, but just leave me out of it. Right. Just don't show up in, if you're a biological male, don't go in my granddaughter's dressing room while she's undressing to go to gym class. Don't do that. Otherwise, leave it alone, don't care. So this nonsense that the transgenders are under attack. No, it is the Christian kids in that school that got murdered, not the transgender person. I don't understand how Joe Biden can do this. I really don't. Now, the morning of the shooting, Joe Biden comes down to the East Room of the White House, and you would think that the first thing he would talk about would be, we've had a terrible tragedy in this country. Our hearts are filled with grief for these kids. I want you to watch. This is what Joe Biden came down and first talked about.
White House.
My name is Joe Biden. I'm Dr. Joe Biden's husband. And I ate Jenny's ice cream, chocolate chip. I came down because I heard there was chocolate chip ice cream. By the way, I have a whole refrigerator full upstairs. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. God.
I mean, that's embarrassing. Yeah. I've been a public official when there was some tragedy, Jonesboro school shootings, tornadoes, and other things. You don't first go and make jokes about ice cream. And then what was so ridiculous about it, he said, I heard you might have some ice cream down here. I came down here for the ice cream. I got a whole freezer full. Well, if you got a freezer full, stay up there and eat your ice cream up there, but get your head put on straight before you come down and start talking ice cream and telling jokes about your wife. Because right now we've got a whole community down here that is in deep grief over 6 people being shot dead in cold blood.
Yeah. He came across as trying to be a stand-up comedian. I don't understand.
Well, Dave Chappelle has nothing to worry about. This guy is not competition. All right, so a TikToker, which is troubling in itself, blames conservatives for the murders. You can't make this up, so I'll just show it to you.
I wonder if the parents of the victims of the Nashville shooting today would still have their children if these trans bills in Tennessee were never a thing. I'm not a parent, but if I were, I'd be real mad at the government. I'd be real mad at the government.
Well, you're not a parent, and frankly, I pray to God you never become one, because if that's the kind of parent you would be, spare the world and spare those children from ever being subject to being raised by somebody as stupid as you are. I'm sorry, but that just irritates me to no end. How does a person say these parents are at fault and the government is at fault? No, the shooter is at fault. That's who did the murders. Now, in the midst of this, Joe Biden was asked the following day, were Christians being targeted? And somebody brought up that Senator Josh Hawley had indicated that Christians were being targeted. Joe thought that was really funny. Let's watch.
Do you believe that Christians were targeted in Nashville school shooting? Do you believe that Christians were targeted?
I have no idea.
Josh Hawley believes they were. What do you say to that?
Well, I probably don't then.
Probably don't.
No, I'm joking. No, I have no idea.
I'm joking. Ha ha ha. You know, most of the time Joe will say, I'm not joking, not a joke. This time, I'm joking. This is not a time for his comedy. It just isn't. And then we have this total yahoo. His name is Cenk Uygur. He used to be on MSNBC until they fired him. When MSNBC fires you because you're a kook, you must be a real kook. And he is a total kook, an absolute gas bag. So he's telling transgender people to get guns right after a shooting where a transgender murders people. Here's his brilliant advice.
And I always tell people, don't get guns. It'll make you less safe. I'm going to make an exception here for trans people. They are actually in danger. They have had hundreds of laws passed against them. They have right-wing media ginning up fear against them 24/7. They are targeted more than any other group in America. And if anyone should get guns, it should be trans Americans.
Everything he just said is an outright lie. An outright lie. This guy named Cenk ought to be changing his name to Jerk. What an idiot. No, transgender people are not being targeted by laws. Laws are being passed in states, and thank God they are, that say that you can't take a child and chemically castrate them because a child isn't capable of understanding what that's doing to them. You can't mutilate the genitals of a child because a child doesn't fully comprehend it. Guys, there is a reason that we don't let children, even up to the age of 18, we don't let them vote, we don't let them enter into contracts, buy real estate, we don't let them buy cigarettes or booze. We don't let them join the military. There's a lot of things that we say, no, they're not mature enough. But are you telling me they're mature enough to make surgical alterations to their bodies that cannot be reversed? That somehow a 7-year-old can wake up one day and say, Mommy, I know I've been a boy. I'd like to be a girl. And then Mommy's supposed to buy him some Barbie dolls and put him in a dress and call him a new name? This is crazy stuff. And I, for one, am not going to sit around and pretend that it is okay. It is not okay. And I'm not going to let this goon who goes on TV and says the trans people are being attacked. No, they aren't. There are less attacks on trans people than there are on Christian people in this country. Statistical fact. And the biggest danger that trans people have is the incredibly high suicide rate that happens once they transgender because they find out that it did not solve their problems. And they need help and counseling, but they do not need idiots like this telling them to get guns, because it didn't work out real well in Nashville last week when that happened. This next little clip is from a transgender activist calling on trans people in Tennessee to fight. Now, keep in mind the context. A trans person has just murdered 6 people in cold blood. This is the advice from one of the trans people.
Trans people in Tennessee, it's time to fight. Trans allies in Tennessee, it's time to fight. Trans women, if they lock you up for identifying as a woman, fight, resist. You're gonna die anyways. We're going to die anyways. It's time to resist. Fight them, hurt them. If they put their hands on you, beat them.
What kind of sickness is that? I didn't even know, was that a guy pretending to be a girl pretending to be a girl pretending to be a guy? I have no idea.
Yeah. No,
But she says, beat him, hit him, and you're going to die anyway. Why? Why are you going to die? Because nobody's out to get you.
Right.
Now, they are trying to protect just what I would call normal teenage girls from having to put up with some guy coming in and undressing in front of them. Are we not going to protect the modesty of a normal 14-year-old girl? Are we going to tell her she's wrong because she doesn't really want to shower with a guy? Folks, this is sick, utterly sick stuff. And of course, the immediate response for so many in the deep state and the left is ban guns. Oh, that sure fix it, because if a person isn't obeying the gun laws we have, I'm sure if we pass a new one, they'll start obeying it. That's the irrational logic of this. The head of Department of Homeland Security, who should never have been given that job and should resign in disgrace, was asked at a Senate hearing this week, what is an assault weapon? Because Joe Biden says we ought to ban them. So you would think that one of the people that would be involved in that would be the head of Homeland Security, because he's also over ATF and many of the police agencies. So he's asked by Senator Kennedy out of Louisiana, what's an assault weapon? Watch this.
Mr. Secretary, yesterday you testified in judiciary that you support an assault weapon ban, and we didn't have much time to talk about that. Tell me your definition once more of an assault weapon.
Senator, we did indeed have a brief exchange on that very important subject. I am not an expert with respect to the definition of the assault bans, and so I defer.
You are the Secretary of Homeland Security.
As I was about to say, I defer to the experts.
Well, why don't then we hire an expert to do the job? If this guy can't even tell us what it is that we're about to ban, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time getting through this, and I'm being very careful not to say certain words in the live stream that I'm tempted to say. But how does a person get a federal job to oversee weapons when he can't even tell you what the weapon is that he wants to ban? How do these people get their jobs? How do they keep them? This is why this country is in trouble. And I'm telling you, elections have consequences. One thing that Barack Obama said that is true, elections have consequences. And if you don't show up and vote these kind of people out of office and put some rational thinking people, even people with terrible personalities and people who maybe say things you don't like, but by golly, we can't let this keep happening or we lose our country. And then your granddaughter is going to be one day in the shower after PE class, and a couple of guys are going to come in and take their clothes off in front of her and get in the shower with her, and it'll be all of our fault for letting it happen. And somehow we're supposed to act like, well, that's normal. It is not normal. And this idea that, well, you can just go in and out of a gender, kind of like you'd go in and out of a preference for an ice cream flavor at Baskin-Robbins. Again, that is insane. No, you can't. Look, I'm a biblical person. The Bible says God created male and female, and we're created as one or the other. There may be some confusion in the minds and hearts of some people, and I'm sympathetic for those who are going through gender dysphoria and who are truly confused about who they are. But they don't need surgery. They need help. And they need to find their identity in Christ, not in gender mutilation. It's beyond me to understand it. Pam, I'm guessing we're getting some questions. I'll take a few here.
Truly.
Then we'll go back.
All right. I want to transition somewhat with this question from M. Posey. Do you have ways that conservatives can help our country besides peaceful protests? I'm feeling lost today, and I think that represents a lot of us.
Well, peaceful protest is certainly one of them. But I'm telling you, it's showing up at school board meetings. It's showing up at city council meetings. It's showing up at county commission meetings. And not being obnoxious and not yelling, screaming, or threatening. None of that. That's not what we need. We need thoughtful, rational people who passionately, but very eloquently are able to say, this is not an acceptable direction for my community. And if you don't do that, then the loudest voices are going to win the debate. But I cannot emphasize enough, it's time for you to start voting your values and quit voting the personalities of somebody because everybody tells you they're really nice people. Joe Biden was said to be the consoler in chief, the guy, the moderate who would bring us together. I'm just going to ask you a simple question. Is that what he's done the past 2 years? No. He's divided this country. He's insulted Christians. He's made it even more difficult to be pro-life, more difficult to believe that it's okay for you to hold to the idea of two genders. He is elevated in a week in which a transgender person murdered 6 people. He's elevated the transgender community and said they're the ones who have brought so many great things to the country. Tell me, please, what those are. How many transgender hospitals do we have that were created by people who were confused about their own identity? So I just don't buy that.
Okay, David White with a super chat has brought his question to the top, actually a comment. We now know why Joe hasn't been to the Mexican border. His handlers haven't been able to lead him there. He may find his way if they serve chocolate chip ice cream.
Well said, David. Speaking of that, let's go to this because we've got a couple of clips, one of which is Joe Biden, and he's on a hot mic, which means a hot mic in the parlance of the day means that there is a microphone that is on you, but it's not supposed to actually be turned on. It's why those of us who regularly use wireless microphones are mindful of the fact that we're wearing one. And when I go to speak, they'll put one on me and say, we'll control it from back at the booth. And I say, the heck you will. I'll turn it off and unplug the son of a gun because I'm not trusting anybody for me to have table conversations and you're recording it back at your booth and releasing it online. So no, we don't go there. Well, Joe had a mic on. It's a hot mic because it was on. Somebody was recording it. Here's what happened.
Heading down here?
Yes, sir. Down the ramp. And we have people lined up on the left over here. Some union leaders and workers.
Hey, guys and ladies.
Your mark is going to be the blue one to the left.
How y'all doing?
You've got a blue mark, and that's okay.
I'll stand my blue mark, and then I'm going to say hello to each one of you.
Yes, sir. I'll help you get started.
Look, I've done hundreds of events. I understand you have people that say when you go out, there'll be a crowd. But I've never had somebody to tell me there's a crowd on your left. Really? Gee, I didn't see that. I mean, Joe has to be handled at a level I've never witnessed before, ever. And I've witnessed a lot, and I understand part of it, but I don't understand that level. But then he finishes a speech, and as David says, sometimes he's completely lost. He doesn't know where to go. And I guess somebody wasn't there like the bunny rabbit to lead him off properly. Watch. I've got a 2-year-old grandson, the youngest of my 7 grandchildren. He follows directions better. I honestly don't have to go and grab him and point him everywhere he goes. I can look at him and nod, and he will come. I've never seen anything quite like this for a person to be elected president of the United States, and he cannot walk off a stage without 4 or 5 people pointing, and he walks a little ways, he stops, he looks like, now what do I do? And he looks around, somebody says, this way. He walks that way a while, now what do I do? That way. It's embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing.
All right, Governor Arthur Allen writing this afternoon, until our voting system is fixed, what good does voting do?
Well, not every state has corrupt voting procedures. A good example, Florida, who had horrible voting problems in 2000, remember in the Bush-Gore race, got it fixed. After the 2020 elections, when some of these states couldn't get their ballots counted, Florida was finished, but 10 o'clock at night had them all finished. No, not one single controversy about their ballots. One of the biggest states, third biggest state in the nation. How'd they do it? Because they ran it like it ought to be run. And most states do. But we've got several, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, where you've got some real problems in the way the ballots are accumulated, tallied. And those states need to get it together. So unless you live in a state where there are massive ballot problems, I wouldn't worry that the elections in your state are the problem. The problem is turnout. Get people to vote. Here's a little stat you may not know. Of the people who self-identify and consider themselves evangelical Christians, only half of them, by the way, that's about 80 million people, only half of them are registered to vote, okay? Follow the numbers here. Half are registered to vote. Of the half that are registered, only half of them vote in a presidential election. So we're now down from 80 million potential voters to basically 20 million actual evangelical voters. Do you realize if those other 60 million would show up in force, not all of them would vote for the conservative, the pro-life, or pro-Bible value candidate, but if most of them would, every election would be transformed, every single election in this country. So when people say it doesn't do anything to vote, no, what doesn't work is when we don't vote at all. So if you've got neighbors and friends or people you go to church with and they don't vote, get in their face and just tell them, thanks to you, we have this stupid stuff going on in our country. Okay, maybe that's not the best way to say it, but today I'm a little fired up, as you can tell, so can't help it.
All right, we're going to go back to Trump's indictment from earlier this week. William Sisk is asking, my question is, did Trump's indictment secure his next presidency?
I personally think it probably did. Things can change a lot. We're 2 years away from the election, not quite, but almost 2 years away. So things can change dramatically, but I felt that what that did yesterday was dramatically up his rationale for being not just the Republican nominee, but being the next president. If the guy who is unfairly targeted can overcome that, he will be one amazing leader. You say, well, do we have any precedent anywhere in the world? How about Nelson Mandela in prison for 27 years? Now he came out and became the hero of the world. So absolutely. And I think that fair-minded people, I'd like to think even if you're a liberal or a hardcore Democrat, you look at what's happening, how can you look at that and say, oh, that's normal. Yeah, that's okay. I'm fine with that. I want you to look at that and say, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a conservative, not even a Christian. But this is an outrage, and I will go vote for Trump just to basically say, hey, deep state, eat this, because I hope they will.
Gandalf 2000, same subject. If Trump is acquitted, can he countersue?
He could countersue anyway. What he will first do is file a series of motions in the courts to have the case dismissed. He will lose in New York, in Manhattan, because the judges there are all hardcore Trump haters. But it may then escalate up to a court of appeals and ultimately to the Supreme Court. What he also will likely do is to go after Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, for malicious prosecution and for selective prosecution. Those are two separate things, but they're both legal avenues that Trump could pursue to say that there have been X number of similar situations. Alvin Bragg has never prosecuted one of them. Why did he prosecute this? Only one. And the same thing, that it was a malicious prosecution because he announced before he even had a crime that he was going to go after Donald Trump. I think that's the easiest case to be made against him.
Well, and Janet Ristoff asks, well, how does Bragg get away with this disgusting thing to our president? What in the world? How has he gotten this far without somebody raising their hand and saying, you can't do this?
In Manhattan, he has nobody to really argue. I'll tell you one of the things, though, we could say, Mike Nefon, remember that name? From Durham, North Carolina. He was the one who prosecuted the Duke lacrosse players. And he was also the one that, when it was all said and done, and they found out that he had withheld exculpatory evidence from the defense, he not only lost his job, he was disbarred and he was humiliated. And his name now lives in infamy and is taught in every law school as an example of a corrupt prosecutor. Mark it down. I believe Alvin Bragg will be talked about in law school as a person who completely went beyond the authority and bounds of the law, and I hope it cost him his law license and his career. It should.